Hello, everyone. I'm Joseph Giarraputo, the founder and editorial director of Global Finance, speaking from New York. I'll be joined by Nombasa Hlathi, head of payments and receivables at South Africa's Standard Bank, speaking from Cape Town. Standard Bank is the largest bank in South Africa and has a strong presence across the continent. They are also a leader in payments and transaction processing. For the last 5 years, Standard Bank has featured prominently in Global Finance's Transaction Banking Awards. The concept of digital, frictionless, borderless payments aims to create a smoother flow of business. How far along is Africa on this journey?
Thanks for the question, Joe. I think Africa is on good progress, well on its way to making this a reality. We have approached it in regions because Africa is quite a huge continent. There are differences in the central banks that participate in the payment stream. There's also variance in language across the Southern Africa, predominant English. If you move more east and west, you get French. And so we are quite a regional based. We have signed treaties within Africa as Pan-Africans to enable payments across. It's seen as trade enablement for our African countries in spreading of our resources within the continent, but also we've seen our people travel across the continent. And therefore, there's a big growth in remittance payments into people sending money back home. And that is becoming the driver into why we must enable payments to be quicker, to be faster, and to cost less. The cost again comes because a number of our regions are divided into in terms of regulations. Within the SADC, with the South African, more in the southern part of Africa, there are different regulating bodies and strict compliance. We are members of FATF and other global markets and so forth. It is important that we participate in those bodies and we enable those payments to avoid any anti-money laundering and make sure they are client across the board. So I think there's a lot of work being done in multiple regions, moving to simple trade. So the southern part will trade in a rand, where in the eastern environment, a lot of the guys will trade in the dollar. So it is quite well on its way. And I think it is really driven by trade that is happening across the continent.
What trends are likely to take African borderless digital payments to the next level?
We have a number of integrators, or you call them fintechs, that are beginning to open up technology. So the actual movement of the money from the one entity to the other digitally, that is quite simple, but it's also access, where you'd find a lot of the people in the African country, cash is still king. So we move a lot of money across digitally, but the final recipient has to have the cash in hand. It is cheaper. The value of the cash remains the same across the continent. So it has been important, the collaboration between the fintechs, the central banks, as well as the banks on the ground. As a bank, we have a unique advantage that we are present close to where the people are. So our outlets becomes a place of where the banks, clients are able to come and collect their money. The fintechs have come in and enable us to get the technology to move the funds, and the central banks are the one enabling the movement of the funds across the border to various treaties. I think what is quite exciting in the African phenomenon is that a lot of the countries are quite independent and a lot of the central banks have their different regulations. We've seen multiple of through the African Union, the finances and the governance of the various banks starting to talk about common monetary policies across various African countries. That's an exciting shift for us as banks, who in each and every country, we have to comply with the different regulations. So that's a huge step in going to the right directions. And I've said the fintechs are giving us the technology to be able to play in the market in a less restricted manner in terms of the movement of the funds across the digital board.
Creating an effective payments infrastructure requires many elements and market participants. What will an African digital borderless payments ecosystem look like?
So the ecosystem is driven by the Association of Banks. A lot of us already are members of the SWIFT environment, so that enables us to communicate today via the SWIFT infrastructure. Regulators play a very important role for us in ensuring that we are compliant and we meet international standards for making those payments. They also play a very important role in managing trade treaties as well as each country's GDP and effective management of financials moving across its country. The aggregators who are becoming big players in the fintechs are starting to change this world. In the past, banking was just banks and regulators. Now we're seeing new parties coming into play and say, look, I have a part to play in this network and in this ecosystem. And they're coming in with different ideas of how we as bank thinks. They bring in a different client lens. Clients are beginning to dictate how we do banking and not the other way around, where banks would sell solutions to clients. But now clients are saying, I'd like to get my money in this way. How does a bank enable me to get it from our phone, via any out? Retailers are becoming a big player in the space as well, because they are also sparsely circulated, especially in rural areas where there's poor road infrastructure to access. Retailers already exist. How do we then get them to be part of this market without trying to really put stringent regulations that they can't really do the work they need to do and the outlets they have to get closer to the individual who is transferring other money for work at home, or who is doing simply material trade across African continent, going on e platforms, sell your trade and making sure your money gets there. So it becoming a wider ecosystem than just the bank and the regulators. We're seeing aggregators as well as retailers coming into play.
Nombasa, this has been very interesting. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much, Joe, for inviting me. Have a lovely afternoon.
Okay, and I want to thank all of our viewers for joining us too.